Welcome back to our Climate Hub, the We Don't Have Time studio here at COP30 in Belém, Brazil. We are now turning our attention to a topic that might be overlooked a bit when it comes to climate, and that will be telecommunications. We all know that telecoms are essential. They're the digital lifelines of our world, and they're keeping people, businesses, and also nations, of course, connected. But what will the impact of climate change be on telecoms? And what can telecoms do in the field of climate action? Well, it turns out the telecom industry is already doing a lot. It's just not cutting its only emissions. That is really happening. But it's also learning how to build resilience into the very networks that keep our economies running. So as the impacts of climate change intensify, the resilience will define which companies can stay connected and thrive. So, with us here today, we have a great panel of experts in this field. As you can see, it's very windy. I don't know what's happening to my hair. Hope it's not too distracting for the audience here. We have a huge air conditioning unit behind us, and sometimes it just goes berserk. So I think that's what's just happened. So anyways, back to the topic here. We have wonderful guests here in the studio, one guest in the studio and a few guests in the Zoom studio. So I'd like to start by turning to Stephen Moore. You are head of climate action at GSMA, which is the Mobile Industry Association. And you are joining us via Zoom. And Stephen, lovely to have you with us on our studio and on our broadcast today.
Lovely to join you. Welcome
Yes.
from London.
You can hear me loud and clear. Excellent. So, Stephen, being at GSMA, you have insight, of course, into mobile operators from all over the world. How would you say the industry is really doing when it comes to net zero and the journey towards net zero so far?
Yeah, the industry, the telecommunications industry, globally has an ambition to be net zero by 2050 at the latest. So this is aligned with Paris and limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees. And since 2019, from the GSMA side, we've been supporting our members with setting voluntary science-based targets that are aligned to this pathway to net zero by 2050. And the good news is that actually 80 of our members, covering a majority of the industry and world's mobile connections, are committed to science-based targets. So that means halving their emissions by 2030. And we've seen good progress against this so far. We've started just in the last year actually to bend the emissions curve globally, which is quite an achievement given that there's been a huge rollout, particularly in new networks, for example, 5G, and there's been a massive increase in data traffic over recent years. Yet despite this, we're seeing emissions starting to come down. And this is really because there's been a huge effort into energy efficiency. So 5G is the most energy efficient network that we have yet created, and also renewable energy technologies. So there's been a huge switch to renewable energy technologies as well, which is helping to drive down emissions.
Thank you, David. So what has been the most difficult for telcos to turn the commitments into action?
Yes, I think one of the most difficult things actually is having a clear, consistent, and credible plan for a whole business in order to align around, in order to make kind of fulfill these commitments that have happened. So this is one of the things that we have looked at from the GSMA side over the last year, and that's to support our members around transition planning. So climate transition planning, effectively, it's a roadmap. We've heard a lot of talk around roadmaps in Belém over the last week. So this is a roadmap really for a company to understand how to put into action these voluntary targets that have been committed to. We noticed actually that a number of our members had published climate transition plans, but there were slight differences between them. They were covering slightly different topics. So we developed with the industry a framework for climate transition planning. We launched it last month, and we've already seen 13 of our members commit to align their transition plans with that framework. And that will enable stakeholders to really understand how those companies are going to credibly address meeting their targets and also address other things like the risks that are associated with adapting to a changing climate, governance, finance as well. All of these things are included in transition plans.
So, Stephen, as climate impacts intensify, how are the telco operators making sure that you're resilient enough to keep the businesses running and the telecommunications open regardless of what happens?
I mean, this is really critical, as you can tell from the slight extreme weather event that was happening to in where you are at the moment with the wind. Obviously, you can see that some operators are having to face this and protect their infrastructure increasingly because of flooding, because of storms, typhoons, etc. So, because we are an infrastructure business, it's so important and relied upon really to make sure so many other things work as well. So we're seeing operators look at making infrastructure much more climate resilient, particularly to things like rising water levels, to things like much higher wind speeds, increasing heat. And that can also mean as well helping to develop early warning systems, which is so crucial. So we've seen a big initiative around the world to have early warning systems to not only protect infrastructure, but more importantly, protect life as well. And we're also seeing actually some of our members lean into making the sort of countries around them where they operate more resilient. So an example would be an operator in the Philippines helping to support the redevelopment and expansion of mangroves. So mangroves are a really important kind of first line of defense when you have, say, typhoons approaching. So there's a number of different ways in which members are helping to do this, but definitely a lot more that we can do in this space as well.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Stephen, and for sharing your insights on this topic. And we'll be right back with the panel. So let's now welcome the panelists for this session. With me here in the studio, I have Laura Fernandez-Cavas, your head of sustainability at Telefonica.
Yes.
Wonderful to have you. It's always nice to have a physical person in the studio, not only Zoom guests, which, well, I mean, Zoom guests are lovely too anyways, but you know what I mean. So Laura, you stay put and I'll introduce the other guests here. We have on Zoom, Andrew Dunnett, Senior Vice President Sustainability, E&. Welcome to the broadcast, Andrew. And also Carmen Nuzzo, Professor in Practice and the Executive Director of the TTPI Global Climate Transition Center. So welcome to our broadcast, Carmen. So I'd like to start with a question to you, Carmen. You're a transition planning expert. Please set the scene for us in this field.
Yeah, thanks, Katharina. Happy to. A credible transition plan isn't just about ambition. I'm happy that Stephen mentioned the word ambition, but it's really about converting that ambition into actions with concrete quantitative metrics, timelines, and transparency. So that's really turning the intention, if you will, into delivery. And let me the experience that I gained here from sitting at the TPI Global Climate Transition Center at the London School of Economics and Political Science. We are the academic partner of the TPI, the Transition Pathway Initiative, which is a global asset owner-led initiative. And we assess independently and rigorously countries, banks, and corporates on the progress that they make in the low carbon transition. So all our assessments are based on publicly available information because we do want to encourage companies to be transparent and accountable, and are available on our website, and encourage all of you to use them. They're, as I said, they're publicly available and they're extremely useful. So we assess companies on two dimensions. On the one side, we look at the pace at which companies decarbonize, they reduce their emission intensity, and whether their net zero targets are aligned with the Paris Agreement goals. On another dimension, we look at the governance, climate governance practices, if you will. And this is where we started to look more recently at the credibility of transition plans. We score companies on a ladder ranging from level 0 to level 5. Level 3 means that a company would be at a stage of integrating climate risks and opportunities in their operation, decision making. Level 5 is where we see the first signs of actual transition planning implementation. And the key ingredients we're looking for are very simple. There are 5 of them, but they really go to the crux of the problem here. So we look at whether companies quantify the key element of their emissions reduction strategy, or whether a company clarifies the role the carbon offsets or other negative emissions technologies might play in their strategy. We look at whether they're decarbonizing capital expenditures in carbon intensive assets or products. And we also look at whether their new CapEx, their new capital expenditures, is aligned with their target goals. And finally, we look for consistency between their policy position and the one that they may be adopting if they're a part of an industry association, so their lobbying activities.
Thank you
So
very
when
much.
it comes to actual telecommunication companies, I have some good news for you, because we analyzed out of the 2,000 companies across 24 sectors, 39 of these are telecommunication companies. They are large listed companies, and they fare quite better than the overall TPI universe. So 33%, let me give you some numbers, because coming from academia, this is what you would expect. But 33% of them score a level 4, meaning that they're at the level of embedding climate risks and opportunity in their strategic assessment. So, for example, they link executive remuneration to climate change, or they undertake scenario planning, or they disclose internal carbon pricing. These are quite sophisticated practices, and some are also beginning to score a level 5 at transition planning implementation. This is about 12.8%, far higher than the average TPI score. So the number of companies at level 4 are almost more than double the number of the TPI universe, and 12.8% at level 5 is higher than the 8.6% that we see for the 8.7 as a whole. There might be a number of reasons very quickly why this is the case. First of all, as I said, these are large listed companies, so they're heavily regulated, and they face increased scrutiny from regulators and investors themselves. They're also data-driven organizations, so in a way, measuring and managing performance and energy consumption and digital infrastructure is kind of easier for them. But also, let me say that perhaps the direct emissions are lower than in other sectors, and the numbers are also more favorable in a way because improvements are visible. Stephen mentioned earlier the transition to renewables, so there is technology available there to decarbonize at a faster speed than in other sectors, and also improving network efficiency. So really, at the moment, we see a very positive story rather than a story of vulnerability. But I would say that it's a sector that, as you said at the beginning, Katarina, one needs to be watching out for, because the data-driven energy demand that is associated with big data centers is going to increase going forward.
Thank you, Carmen. Turning now to Andrew and Laura, I'm going to have you as the first. You two, the two of you work directly with the mobile operators, have set some very clear carbon targets. So what can you tell us about those targets?
So just Telefónica is a telco operator. We are a Spanish company, but we have a big footprint. We are, for example, here in Brazil is one of our main markets. Just to give some figures, because it's difficult if not, we have a long story nowadays in transition, because now we are talking a lot about the 10 years since the COP, in the Paris COP. So what I can say, for example, is that since 10 years ago in Telefónica and the whole group, that means in all the geographies where we have or have had a footprint in those 10 years, we have reduced 84.8% since the baseline in what we consider what we call direct emissions. That is what just depend on us, on the company. That's what we call the environmental people. We call it scope 1 and 2. But we are now mainly working at scope 3 because the value change in the case of the ICT sector has a very relevant story to work on in the last years, but mainly in the next one. So we are also working a lot in COP30 emissions. We have been validated. We were the first company in the world to be validated by Science-Based Target in 2022, including this COP30 emissions, because it's not so easy to try to think about how we are going to become net zero by 2040. That's our commitment, for example, in Telefonica. And as Stephen mentioned at the beginning, it's not just our story, it's a story that we have been repeated along the sector, so it's quite committed. We are not the only one working on this. What I can say, for example, in terms of on how to get this, we have a climate action plan publicly available if you want to check. But it's quite relevant to mention when we talk about, within the climate action plan, we call them models, but I like to call them leverages. So how many leverages do we need to act on along the whole company to make climate decisions and to do this transition to reduce emissions? And within that climate action plan, we talk about the operational model. So like Stephen mentioned before, anything that is shut down of legacy technology, so where we come from in terms of technology and we are going to, that has worked a lot in energy efficiency along the years. We talk about the commercial model. We need to generate awareness in our clients, in companies, but also in consumers, to help them to make also decisions based on environmental topics, because that's going to help us too. We talk about the value chain model. We are working a lot. So we have a lot of plans in place, common with other peers, of course, with the sector, with associations, so that we can put together solutions for suppliers, mainly when they are common ICT sector suppliers, for example. So we try to work generally. We talk about the financial model. So we do issue green bonds, for example. So there are a lot of leverages that companies are activating so that we can reach, in our case, that 2040, that it's a long time from now, but not so much if we want to reach the numbers.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. Turning now to Andrew. What can you tell us about how you work with the targets, please?
Thank you. Well, it's great to join you, and thanks to GSMA for their leadership, as always, in this space and the reports that they do. There was one on circularity earlier the year, which was really helpful, and I applaud Telefonica. I mean, they led this and have done so for 10 years in our industry, in our sector. They have made great progress. I think it's impossible to do my job without a climate transition plan. I mean, you set some big audacious goals for 2030, 2040, 2050, maybe. You've got to be able to have a plan where you can simply outline to a management board who are not experts in environmental policy or climate change to understand how we're going to get to the externally listed targets that we put out there. So I think the report is great because it makes that case. Maybe if I just sort of illustrate that. What does it mean to me? We did a climate, we set targets. We're behind Telefonica in terms of, we're a younger company in terms of our growth trajectory. So we really started this in 22, 23. We baselined in 22. We set targets in 23. We published a climate transition plan in 24. We re-baselined our numbers to check our 22 numbers are accurate. And obviously we found one or two issues in that, as everyone does this year, and we externally assured this year. So that's our journey. But the plan is critical because I can go into any board meeting and say, look, we've committed to a 43% reduction in the United Arab Emirates, where we're domiciled, by 2030. 100% reduction in UAE, a 43% reduction across the group. And I know exactly how we're going to do that. 80% is around renewable energy, how we purchase renewable energy across the group. So the climate transition plan has a plan for every market in which we operate and how they're going to hit that 80% target of renewable energy. 15% is stationary combustion. So connecting our networks to the network to the grid, which is absolutely critical. Funnily enough, people get most excited by electric vehicles. It's 3%. It's great. It's a nice thing to see, but it's not actually going to move the dial in terms of our overall target. And then when you come to scope 3, which is what Telefonica are really working on at the moment, we've set a 25% as our first target for 2030. There are 3 ways we'll do that. Number 1, we reduce combustion in 1 and 2, which will contribute to our scope 3. Number 2, our top 6 suppliers are critical to working with to enable us to hit our targets. If they hit their target, we'll go a long way to hitting our target. And thirdly, we have 2 investments. One, Vodafone, great trajectory in this area. If they hit their target, that will contribute to us. And Mobily, an investment in Saudi, if they hit their targets, that will make us around about 6-7% reduction in there. So I think the plan is critical, because if you can't explain it simply to the management team, to the finance director, to the technology team who are buying the equipment that we've just talked about that has all the impact, then you can't really do your job. I don't know how to put it more bluntly than that. It's very difficult to do your job in the jobs that we do unless you've got that plan in front of you. It will change. We're reviewing ours 2 years in next year. Why do we want to review it 2 years in? The changes in the energy markets and the fact that nuclear is coming on stream significantly in our region, our part of the world. So we need to factor those things in. But I think you have to have a plan that you can review every 24 months and check where you are against it.
Thank you, Andrew. So Lauren, when it comes to resilience, climate resilience, both in terms of physical impacts and also the broader transition to a low carbon economy, what can you say about this? Because this is really also a very important part of the puzzle, right?
Yes, adaptation. So we've been talking a lot in the last decades, I would say, about what is the mitigation of climate change, how we can manage to reduce the emissions to the atmosphere. Now we are also trying to put in place, not we the companies, but all the ecosystem is trying to put in place. What about the resilience? What about the adaptation of the climate change? So how are you planning to act in advance if you are assuming that at some point you're going to have some issues related with climate extreme events, let's say. In this action plan that I was mentioning, one of the models that we talk about is the adaptation model. One of the things that company has to do, I will try to explain it like very simplified, is to try to put in place by computers, not by people, but try to put in place the assets that we have where they are physically located one by one, and there are thousands, more than thousands, with these IPCC scenarios that they are projecting, and where it's more probable that floods come, for example, or that issues like any kind of environmental issue that can be an extreme weather event can happen in that place. So what we do is that we put those maps in place at the same time and try to check which ones of our assets are going to be impacted in the coming years. And that is part of the job of the companies, to try to work on resilience. That's what it means when we talk about working in resilience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Laura. Turning now back to Carmen, could you briefly talk a little bit about what's next for transition planning, Carmen?
Yeah, sure. It's been fascinating to listen to the discussion. And Laura, congratulations, because I was just checking on the website. Actually, Telefonica ranks number 5 on our score ladder, which is great. It's really going back to the point I made earlier. How do you turn this ambition into action? The test, echoing a bit what Andrew said earlier, is it's for the institutional capacity and the economic foresight that a company has in place. So we really need quantitative metrics, especially metrics related to capital expenditures, the investment plans, but more importantly, also the funding that comes with that. How is this feasible? Is it from a financial perspective? And also if the plans is resilient to political and market shifts. So it's not about one person job. It's really about having the whole company on board, from the board level all the way to the grassroots supports that need to be nurtured, meaning that the CFO, the chief financial officer, has to be brought into the game here, not just the sustainability team, because these are figures and board members that may not, as Andrew said, necessarily have the technical knowledge to understand climate change risks and opportunities, have to be equipped with the right skills to take the right decision. And finally, I would also say it's about transparency and the recognition that these transition plans are dynamic. They can change along the time. And Andrew mentioned the word journey. Is not a one-off exercise or a ticking box exercise. Things change, the environment changes, and these transition plans need to be adaptable. And so having that conversation, especially with the funding partners, the investors that I'm very close Telcos with as part of the work that we do here at the TPI Center is very important, because they can accompany companies along these journeys. And if targets are met, are missed, sorry, there might be a good reason for it. But explaining what the remedial strategy is as important as having the transition plan in place.
Thank you, Carmen. Turning now back to Stephen. You've been waiting for a while. Sorry about that. I'd like to hear your perspective on what the telco industry really can share to other industries and also to policymakers from the learnings that you've done from this journey. And because we do have a lot of people watching this that are not from the telco industry. So the transition that you've achieved, all the reductions that are quite substantial, what can other policymakers and industries learn, please?
Sorry, I was on mute. What I've been struck by actually since I started working on this program back in 2019 was just the willingness to collaborate on this topic, really, from companies around the world. So there are obviously different specific challenges that they face in different countries, but there are a lot of commonalities. And there's a real willingness actually to share what they're doing. Some are not only the best practice side of it, look how well we're doing on this, but also really some of the struggles and anxieties. We've run kind of climate therapy sessions with our members actually to talk through some of the challenges so they have an opportunity and a safe space to share them, which has worked really well, actually. We've also kind of lent into this slightly clumsy word of co-opetition. So there's both collaboration, but also some competition at the same time, which has really worked because I think, our members want to work together, but they also want to be leaders. Many of them. We have 2 leaders here, very much in terms of what Telefónica's done, but also what EAND has done as well in terms of the climate transition plan, is really leading in many ways. So I'd say those are some of the key elements that have helped to make what we do working collaboratively with the industry a success so far. And I think we can see that. I mean, it's great to hear some of the stats from Carmen actually around how we're showing up on climate transition planning. We can see that feeding through in terms of the data, and we're very keen on tracking that from the GSMA side as well, because we want to understand and be able to communicate what we're doing against this net zero ambition. We want to have our own kind of industry stock take so that we understand, how fast we're going and, where we need to perhaps accelerate in some areas or give more support.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that intervention, Stephen. And also thank you, Andrew, Carmen, and Laura. The session is unfortunately running out. There is so much more that you could have shared, but we have limited time on the broadcast, as always. So people can find more information on your website, on the GSMA web page, of course, and on the different organizations that you represent, because what you do is truly inspiring. And thank you for joining us and giving us this inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.